Good evening. Thanks to everyone who is joining me today. We'll just leave it for another few seconds. Got a few more people booked on, and uh, w- and then we'll get started. Brilliant. Well, I'm going to get going, I think. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar on governing in a multi-academy trust. We're going to be thinking about organisational identity and really looking at the interlink between MAT governance and organisational identity, thinking about some of the big considerations of where the two come together. For those of you who I haven't met before. My name's Sam Henson. I'm the Director of Policy and Information at the National Governance Association. Thank you so much for joining me today. Here's just a brief outline of some of the things that we're going to be looking at, thinking about what it means to be one trust, thinking about the specifics of the governance role in getting there, but also I wanted to talk a little bit about the innovative aspects of governance in terms of reaching out to your communities, thinking about how you utilize the local tier to maximize the one organization mantra, which I'm going to be talking about today. Just before I get going with what we're going to be talking about, I've just got a quick poll just to see who we've got with us today. So Molly, if you could launch that poll for us, that would be brilliant. And if you could just tell us your role, just give me a good idea of who is with us today. Thanks, Molly. Brilliant. And once that's done, the answers will come in, and that will just be really helpful in directing some of the conversation today. Thank you. Brilliant. Okay, so a real mix. Some MAT trustees, as we'd expect, some maintained school governors and SAT trustees as well, and some governance professionals. So a really good mix today. So thank you. And oh, going the wrong way. Right. Okie doke. So for this session today, I really wanted to start it off and anchor it really in the wider work that NGA has done in terms of multi-academy trusts. For those of you who aren't familiar with this report and a previous report we did in 2019, for the first time, NGA in 2019 brought together all of its findings in terms of MAT governance, and we did a follow-on report earlier on this year, and both these reports really formed a roadmap, if you like, identifying the key themes that were really important to moving the MAT governance story further. And the MAT governance story so far, I think it's fair to say, has been far from straightforward. We're only partway through this governance revolution. There's lots happening right now in different trusts up and down the country who are doing different things, experimenting with the way that they do governance. The pandemic clearly has meant that some trusts have been thinking slightly differently as a result of that, how they want to do governance within their trusts, and how their governance really reflects who their trust is as well. Some trusts have been experimenting for quite a number of years and have, tried different things. Some things haven't worked. Some things have worked really well. I've built on all of that today and brought this into our thinking. I think it's worth saying that the foundations, the rule book, if you like, the articles of association, the Academy Trust Handbook, the funding agreement, all those things. It's important we go back to those to think about what we can and can't do, but the possibilities are essentially wide open when we look at those. There's lots of scope for doing things differently, and so I'm gonna really kind of bear that in mind in this conversation. Before I get into the specifics, some of the overall findings in terms of organizational identity, I put that quote there for you, and that's kind of the concluding statement on this part of the report. But moving matters forward, I guess ultimately concluded that not enough trusts were promoting that they are driven by a shared vision, a shared set of values. And while increased community perspective and the push for more intelligent accountability has been embraced, that's really brought about a need, if you like, for an actual model that strengthens local accountability. And what we're seeing as a result of that is a time that's held in really a renaissance of meaningful engagement of communities through the MAP governance system, and through the possibilities that the structure affords. The experience of virtual governance over the last 18 months, 2 years has clearly played a role in that. It's already provided some advantages to some trusts in the way they want to do things. But it's not just about getting governance right, but keeping it relevant and evolving. And I think, for those MAP trustees that are here today, for governance professionals that have been involved in MAP governance for some time, I'm sure you're already aware of, just because you go through an exercise to review and change your MAP governance, that might not stay like that for that long. Depending on the needs of your trust, the context, things do change, and sometimes fairly quickly. I think there is a fundamental issue that we should acknowledge right at the beginning of this session, and that's the fact that school governance in MAPs isn't actually particularly easy to understand for the wider public. It's not particularly easy to understand for even those within the MAT itself, whether that be staff or pupils, or whether that be people within the central team. And we need to acknowledge that and bear that in mind when we think about how governance plays into the organisational identity conversation. A few weeks ago, we published our report on governing in a multi-academy trust, which was taken from this year's annual governance survey. And within that, we've got some stats which are very relevant to this conversation. 60% of those governing at a local level, so if that's your local academy committee respondents, or whether that was local governing bodies, whatever you call them, 60% of those said that they felt their school feels part of one organisation. And whilst that's a significant number, it clearly shows there's room for improvement, and actually that figure's slightly down on the last time we asked that question in 2019. So there's clearly some work to be done here. Meanwhile, though, there is more in terms of recognition of the value that the work of the MAT adds to the individual schools themselves. 69% of local academy committees said their MAT adds value to the work of the school, and that was slightly up. And individual schools also seem to be more willing to pool resources across the trust. We're at the halfway mark, just over 50%, I think it was, of those locally saying, agreeing to that. But again, still some way to go, and that's really relevant to this entire conversation, because I think when schools are not willing, or there's some resistance there, that I think that indicates that one organisation conversation needs to keep being had. There needs to be a big ongoing dialogue on that conversation. So I wanted to really kind of think about what are the challenges facing this particular conversations. Why is this such a big deal? What are the issues that are out there that's hindering us getting to where we need to be with this conversation? Organisational identity, I think, has been hindered in the past by a constant flow of criticism aimed at trusts, whether that was the monopolisation of schools and the way some trusts were growing very quickly, whether that is the geographically dispersed nature of some trusts, whether that was the incorrect and unhelpful perception that's out there of maths being trying to privatize schools and turning schools into some sort of profit-making business. These things aren't true, but those perceptions are out there. They've been causing issues really for this whole conversation. And as a result, I think that's created a degree of distrust, which is one thing when we were doing the reports, we picked this up on numerous levels, that degree of distrust that still is prevalent in some parts of the country, in some local communities today, who really still viewing maths very much through a corporate lens, rather than seeing them as organisations that are essentially there to advance the education for the pupils in their schools. So that conversation, I think, has distracted the reflection on how the local tier in particular offers maths a legitimate passage to establishing itself as a community player and getting local buy-in to its existence. And that diminished role of the stakeholder voice, the fear of that, needs to continue to be part of that conversation. How do local communities get a voice within these organisations? And if you're a MAT trustee, I think it's about thinking, how do we ensure that our local communities, our stakeholders, are assured that we want to give them a voice, and how do they become part of that? The concept and definition of community itself for some MATs, I think, has been a point of debate as well. And that's something we need to think about. Interestingly, just this week, in fact yesterday, the DfE released a research report on the benefits and obstacles of joining a multi-academy trust. And I was just looking at that earlier, and over 3/4 who were concerned and didn't want to join a trust because of those concerns were worried about a loss of the school's identity itself. 77% said that. And I think that's reflective of the genuine sense of worry that schools can and do have, that they would be required to take on a new identity, consistent across all schools in the MAT, and that loss of identity is something that's stopping them from ultimately taking that step. Where the school has a long history and clear traditions and heritage, which ultimately there is a worry there that they may get consumed by a standardized MAT format. And two writers who write about this, Albert and Wheaton, they write about organisational identity from across different sectors, and they've observed that the task of managing organisational identity is often neglected until an organisation reaches a point where it is unavoidable. And situations include when an organisation has experienced significant growth, or has fostered multiple identities because of its growth, and that situation has become damaging to the movement, the maturing of that organisation. And that was really interesting, because when we did our research that formed the basis of our Moving Maths Forward and Maths Moving Forward reports, we found a familiar pattern emerging where trusts forge a collective identity retrospectively, and the common steps where MATs are taken to creating a single organisational identity retrospectively included when they needed to challenge bias that had emerged, when they needed to embrace change, when there had been a substantial period or a prolonged period of growth, or whether it simply is just wanting to achieve a greater sense of buy-in that they took that step to actually, this is something we need to go back to and tackle. Organizational identity, then, I think, when we're looking at, we need to consider each of these things. And a strong MAT governance needs organizations to know who it is, and I think an organization to develop in its identity needs strong governance as well. So governance feeds very much into the identity forming, and identity fuels governance, and it fuels the model and the practice of governance within that trust. I think the model that is adopted says a lot about who the trust is, and how it wants to be perceived. The fragmented identity that can emerge out from the things that we were talking about earlier, I think that can really prevent the governance and the executive structures from marrying up. It can create it can contribute to that picture that already exists of governance in trust not always being easy to understand. And there's also a challenge that there's a misunderstanding that I think still exists, that MATs are a form of loose collaboration or a partnership, rather than seeing it as for what it is, as a single organisation. And that's been further hindered, I think, as well, by that relentless conversation, that rhetoric around autonomy. When we're promising schools that they join our trust, and we leave them alone and they can do whatever they want. Not quite to that effect, but you know what I mean. I think that can be damaging, because actually it's a promise that you can't always keep when you need to step in and do something different. So the perception there, I think, has hindered the recognition of the accurate identification of MATs as a single legal entity. And so I do just quickly, one more thing to say on that slide actually is, I do think one of the things that helps on quite a practical level is that sort of broken record technique, and just using that language, one organization, one trust, over and over again, wherever you can, whether it's in your strategy, your vision, however you're communicating with your stakeholders, talking about yourself like that until it sinks in, and people kind of almost get a bit bored of it. I think actually that language is very helpful, just to put that point across. And I'm a MAT trustee. I actually got a trustees meeting straight after this webinar tonight that I'll be going to. But one thing we've done in our trust is getting that one trust wording into our communication, into our strategy, and just making sure it's there for people to see. I'm not going to dwell on this long, but I just wanted to say, in terms of mission, the trust community, going back to what we were saying earlier, simply put, might not know what your purpose is. Mission talks about your purpose, it's the business you're in, but the trust community might simply not know what it is. And whilst that mission is dictated kind of largely by the framework itself, actually there is an opportunity there to enhance that, and I think to really communicate and share that with your stakeholders, and just making sure as a first step, people understand what the purpose of your existence is, and the nature of your business, and actually maybe it might be that business is the wrong word. Actually, the nature, what you're there to do, that purpose, and making sure you're sharing that mission, I think affects your brand, it affects your culture, it affects morale and standards. Mission ultimately is key to getting organizational identity right. And then clearly the next big thing is vision, and that depends on the right strategy, but that can only be done if the right culture is in place. And that positive trust culture enables the organization to be ambitious, to show itself as an ambitious organization. Um, and culture makes the trust unique. But in our Moving Maths Forward series, it revealed a key challenge to all this is the fact that by definition maths are made up of individual schools. Individual schools, we find that culture has developed over many years, and so there's a challenge there. Whereas in a math, there is all of a sudden, particularly if you go for a sustained period of growth, there's serious potential for a culture clash to emerge, and so these things need to be discussed as part of uh, the, the vision conversation. The creation of any one trust community, I think, is reliant on how it's underpinned by a culture informed by what's important to the trust. And for that to happen, those values need to be developed through that collaborative cross-community process. And that's part of the challenge. How do we involve not just one school community, but all school communities in that conversation? And I think clearly that's a challenge. Different trusts have implemented that in different ways, but the trusts that have been most successful in implementing their organizational identity well, the ones that have involved, I think, that cross community process as part of that. Ultimately, I think though what our research showed was a failure to create a one organization mentality can and eventually will undermine the implementation of the vision itself. And so it's really, really key the two go very much hand in hand. And for it to be a credible vision that's committed to developing school communities, you need to give them a voice. And my argument is, that can be done most effectively through the local tier. So not just engage, but actually make them part of the structure itself. Communication is really, really key to all of this. And from our survey, 60% of those governing at a local level said that communication with the trust board is effective, but there's still a lot of room for improvement clearly there. We saw some different experiences during the pandemic of some people saying that the trust wasn't communicating well with them at a local level, but the more common experience was an improved picture from that governance. The instigation of regular virtual meetings, for example, whether that would be chairs meetings, the chairs of the local tier, local governing body chairs or academy committee chairs coming together and in the virtual setting and talking to the trust board chair, for example. I think that's been a key part of that. But there is still a need for the trustees themselves to be keeping visible. I think that's really important over the years. And one thing we've seen that the trusts have struggled with their communication is where the trustees simply aren't visible with the schools within the trust. So thinking about how you want to do that. Ultimately though, I think whatever communication channels you use, they need to adapt and grow as the trust adapts and grows. And I think that means be open to the fact that those communication channels can change very quickly. A clear example of that is where trusts in the past have relied on the same individuals sitting on different tiers within the governance structure. So trustees also being on the local level, or members also being trustees, and that's created some real issues in the past. And NGA very much advocates that maximum separation model. I know other people argue something different, but I think there's clear reasons why separation between tiers is needed. I'm going to come right back to that in 1 second. Not going to dwell on this for too much, but I do think the centralisation versus localisation conversation needs to be part of this discussion. And while that increased centralisation within the maths has provoked some of the fiercest debate in the past, we're starting to see a lot more individual schools really being quite upfront about the benefits of it. And I don't think you have to be one or the other. Some of the best examples we've seen is a real mixed approach. Yeah, things like finance, and that might be a very centralized approach, but those trusts still build in a localized approach for other things. And you know, that can include governance as well. If you're a fairly geographically dispersed trust, you know, whether that's looking at how you implement uh, intelligence at a hub level to do that, or whether it's just, you know, not a formal part of the governance structure itself, but it's that communication between, like I said, bringing chairs together and to feed that intelligence together into one place. I think that could be really helpful. So this was just to flag up what I was saying a minute ago, really, about the need for clarity with your structure. As a charity trustee, you're there to ensure the charity is accountable, and accountability needs to be there for members, for beneficiaries and funders, and it's the public that fund you, so being accountable to them is really important. As company directors, the trustees fill both hats. They're there to give a creative contribution to providing oversight and challenge and making verdicts for the good of stakeholders, and you can't do that if you don't know what the stakeholders think. So I think making part of them part of the structure, going beyond just engagement, making them part of it, is a really positive thing to do. But this all relies on the structure being clear and people understanding who does what, and that relies on getting the lines of accountability in the right places. That relies on separation to ensure a lack of conflicts or undue power and influence from emerging in certain individuals. And the biggest tool to make sure, one of the biggest tools to make sure you really get this right, is your scheme of delegation. And the scheme of delegation, I think, is the humble hero in all of this. It can bring everything together. And it can actually, whilst it's just a document, actually it sets out in a transparent way how you do things. I think it's a signal of intent. You know, if you have your scheme of delegation there, you are upfront about your structure, you're upfront about how decisions are made. Actually, it shows that you're wanting to build a culture of transparency. That's part of who you are. That's part of your identity. But I don't think enough trusts use the scheme of delegation to maximum effect. That, you know, there's a lot of freedom to do what you need to do with this document. You don't need lawyers to draft it for you. You need to have one. You need to publish it. But essentially, you know, I think using it to maximum effect, rather than seeing it simply as a compliance thing that's tucked away in a dusty corner of your website, actually being upfront and using it to show new schools that might want to join you in the future. Look, we have this. This shows you exactly what we're about, how we do things. You know, if you like the look of it, come and join us. You know, it's can be positively used as a marketing tool, but still, you know, not enough trusts have really thought about the potential of the scheme delegation. NGA has models, which I put the link there for you. But I do think it's something that we need to come back to and like I say, use to maximum effect. I'm incredibly aware it's 5 o'clock. Literally got a couple more slides. I'll just do this really quickly. Governance models themselves. The governance model, I guess this is by means of a conclusion to all of this anyway. But the governance model really does reflect your identity. The organisational form expressed very much through the pattern of governance. That local tier, like I said earlier, can really be a statement of intent of how you want to do things. That local tier, harnessing that local voice and equipping your trust to build into local culture. It's the local tier is has caused some of the biggest problems for trust, yeah, but actually I would argue that it's the space that has caused that allows the most room for innovation. Um, you know, you don't need to go to the DFE to check your model if you're staying within the remit of your articles, and lots can be achieved within that. But simply asking questions: have you got eyes and ears at local level, and are they listening and watching the right things? Is the agenda what you want it to be? Don't stick to that rigid local governing body agenda that has been there for the last 10 years, because that's the way things have always been done. It doesn't need to be like that. If it's growing stale and meaningless, don't keep it, do something different with it. But trusts, generally speaking, all the trusts we speak to are very much committed to a form of local tier. But we're getting more innovative with that. It might be you're linking that with strategic priorities, and it might be that you can have a hub model that is not just based on a geographical remit, but based on pulling together, looking at specific strategic objectives, strategic priorities, and doing things differently like that. So like I say, it can be one of the most innovative parts, and there is a lot of room for doing things differently there. I'm not going to talk about that. My final slide was just to flag up this guidance with you that we released last week for any trusts that are looking to merge with each other. I guess all I would say here is arguably the most important consideration for a merger is whether the two trusts have compatible organisational cultures. And before getting into the legal mechanics of any transfer and any merger, the agreed governance and the structure, the organisational identity, that the desire for what sort of trust you want to be, that's got to be a key part of that conversation at that point in time. And it also happens to be one of the reasons that in other sectors we've seen mergers between two different organisations hasn't come to pass as a result. I appreciate I've had to rush the end of that. I mean, these slides will be going out just to flag up with you at our next webinar in December. My colleague Steve and we'll be delivering a webinar on leading the way on being exemplary employers. So do sign up to that. The recording of this will be made available if you did want to re-listen. I'm sure I haven't kept looking at the chat function or anything, but we will go back over that. If you want to contact me directly with any questions, please do that at sam.henson@nga.org.uk. I'd be happy to answer any questions at all. But thank you so much for joining me. I'm sure some of you, like me, have probably got a governing board meeting to attend, or maybe just dinner, which sounds quite nice right now. But I hope you have a good rest of the evening, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.